let's get going on having this conversation about powering change in our time. Now, as you've already heard, I'm currently working with an organization called CURIOSS, which is this international community of university and research institution open source program offices. You can see it's a bit of a mouthful, which is why we shortened it to CURIOSS. But I'm also a PhD researcher here, a candidate here in the University of Galway, looking at the whole area of applying open source methods to building proprietary code, actually. So this is an area that I've been interested in for about the last maybe 7 or 8 years. But before that, I was nearly 10 years heading up the developer and platform group in Microsoft Ireland. And part of that whole journey was going out and talking to people about adopting new technologies. Adopting cloud at the time was the big theme when I was back there in 2017. And I wanted to start by maybe taking a little step back in time to that time when I was back in Microsoft, because I was going around talking to people about what does it mean to adopt the latest technologies from Microsoft. And we were talking about this whole idea of the fourth industrial revolution, because there was so much going on at that time. We had things like autonomous vehicles and robotics and 3D printing. And we had all the stuff coming around decoding the genome and how we would actually be able to do that. And, you know, we were talking about IoT and virtual reality and blockchain and quantum and AI, though at that time, AI was pretty much, you know, a little bit of advanced analytics and some robotic process automation. But even still, it seemed a lot. But on top of that, we had demographics changing, we had business models changing, we were shifting to SaaS from product models, we had work trends changing, we were starting to see the start of remote working. We were thinking about the environment we were working. Climate change was coming at us. We were talking a lot about Brexit. And there was a lot about cybercrime. Some things never change. So we were talking about all these trends. And I remember thinking and describing this as a world of VUCA, right? Like this idea that came from, I think, the American military, of operating in a climate of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. And everyone was nodding at me in the audience. And now I look back to those simpler times in 2017, 18, and I'm thinking to myself, gosh, we had it good then, didn't we? Because since then, we've had a global pandemic. We've had multiple wars where there are hundreds of thousands of people dying. We've had climate change really kind of hit home with multiple natural disasters. And, you know, you'd be looking at this and you'd be thinking, it's actually hitting really close to home now. Like, it's not just some sort of earthquake or, you know, flood in some far-flung place of the world. We're looking at Los Angeles on fire, right close to the tech hubs, because surely with that sort of impact hitting right up close to your home, you have all our best and brightest brains thinking about how do we solve for the climate change crisis at home. You think, right? Except most of them are thinking about how do we actually get off planet and go to the moon in cowboy hats and phallic-shaped rockets. But that's all right, because, you know, in case you think it's all just a little bit too manly, we do have something for the ladies, which is that they can come too, and particularly if they look this good in the new spacesuits that look like something from the Avengers movies. But nonetheless, that might be all a little bit too DEI. So let's get back some masculine energy into the room, and let's talk about how do we really deal with the kind of coming change. But we do have to pay for it all. So how do we do that with lowering productivity levels worldwide? Well, it's all right, because Gen AI is here to save us all, and it will actually raise our GDP, and we've heard it here, and there are estimates the world over that Gen AI will indeed contribute huge GDP productivity gains the world over. But that also comes with a huge amount of disruption to how we work and how we live. This is just one example, which is Satya Nadella talking about how now as much as 30% of the Microsoft code is written by AI. The same Satya Nadella just reported that they're going to be making a reduction in the workforce of 6,000 people, or 3% of the workforce, because of the productivity gains that they are getting, and in order to enable themselves in this new world. And I think it's true to say that even if Gen AI isn't coming to take your job, it will cause disruption to all jobs, and it will take many jobs, and even if new jobs are being created, the question is, how do we deal with all this disruption? And in case we thought that dealing with all that disruption was enough disruption, let's throw in some tariff problems, because God knows we wouldn't want to keep anything solid for any 2 weeks in a row. And let's do it in the dark, because we don't even necessarily have the power infrastructure to do it all. And if you think this is just in Spain, I came down from the hotel this morning to my breakfast for this headline, which is that we'll have to choose between housing or AI. Top civil service servant warns. That's Ireland. And that's because right now, today, 50% of the energy consumption in the Dublin-Meath area is all going to data centres. And that's set to actually increase in terms of the need, and is our infrastructure ready? Now, you look at all that, and you kind of have to say, phew, that's a lot of VUCA, right? In fact, I would say that we are at next level VUCA in the game of life. My son, my 10-year-old son, would call this boss level VUCA. So I'm like, in this climate, and you have to kind of look at the climate we're operating in. We have heard so much today about the potential of AI and the requirements for things like cybersecurity, and they are all absolutely true. The opportunities are immense. But every time I hear about all the things that we should be doing in order to take advantage of these opportunities and deal with the coming challenges, I'm thinking, we are operating in an incredibly stressful VUCA environment. So what can we do to actually make ourselves better at being able to get to all these opportunities, being able to do all the to-dos and the great best practices that have been shared already here today? How do we make space when we're busy worrying about all the stuff that I just covered? How do organizations enable themselves to find the money to invest in this? How do they even begin to talk to their employees about doing all this in the context where those employees might be worrying about their future? So this is the reason why I'm very interested in this idea of operating principles. How do we survive in this new world? And I think there's a couple of rules that I'm living by now, and this is what I wanted to talk to you today about. One thing is, we need to do things differently. And this isn't just like a few actions differently. This is rethinking how we actually organize how we do things in the world. And the past is not a predictor. It was said here already today. You can't be looking to the past when you think about what we're going to do in the future. The other thing is that technology, including AI, is really cool. But a lot of focus and investment is building the prototype. It's building the technology. It's building the next solution. And I believe not enough focus is put on adoption. How do we actually ready ourselves for adoption? How do we do the right level of adoption? You've heard a lot today about things like governance, data governance, regulation. All of these are new challenges that we have to overcome if we're actually going to be able to realize the positive impacts of this technology. And we're not ready to be able to figure out how to do that. And at least as we figure it out, we want to do it together, because there's no point in us all trying to figure this out separately. There's no one individual. There's no one organization. I would say there's not even one nation that can do this by themselves, because most of these challenges are universal, and we have to work together to do them. And the other thing is that if we think about collaboration being an answer to being able to do these things together, then we have to realize that it doesn't come for free. And this is a lot of what I've been focusing on for the last number of years, because there's this notion, I think, that we just shift our mindset, we just wish that we're going to be more collaborative, and then it'll magically happen. Maybe we'll read a book or two, but the point is that this stuff is hard, and you need to put scaffolding and supports in place if it's actually going to work, which is why I'm very interested in the whole area of open source software. I came across this or started to be involved in this about 7 or 8 years ago, and it really, for me, has struck home. It's solving for a lot of these challenges and these principles that I'm talking about. So how many of you here would be very familiar with open source software, what it is and everything? Excellent. Well, then this will just be a little bit of a refresher. But essentially, open source software is not a different type of software. It's a different type of license. It's a license that is applied to software that makes it free to run, free to share, free to study and modify, and free to distribute the modified versions. And that means that it's the kind of software that actually spreads very rapidly. It also is not just code. It comes with a way of working that allows and that involves certain tools, certain processes, certain culture that means that collaboration becomes more easy. And they are documented, and they are practiced, and they have been learned over now 20 years of open source communities, the successful ones at least, figuring out how to do this at a very practical level. And it's matured, because if I asked you all now to close your eyes and think of an open source developer, would they look something like this? Like a lone developer, perhaps sitting in their basement, deciding to actually work on some sort of volunteer passion project, maybe wearing sandals. That's typically the kind of response I get back when I talk to people about what open source developers look like. But the truth is, these days, it's matured. And most and a lot of, in fact, the folks working in this field are sitting in professional organizations, many of whom are actually represented here today. They're working on open source software that becomes commercial products or becomes services. Maybe they are even what is called a commercial open source company. These technologies are often built for very specific economic and social impact. They often involve industry collaborations or even collaborations across sectors between government and academia and industry. They often are done in the context of policy and regulation, and they may still be wearing sandals. But that is because sandals are incredibly comfortable, and if I could, I'd be wearing them today, but it was a bit rainy. Nonetheless, I would say open source is currently everywhere. It is in 98% of the world's software, contains open source, and they say about 70 to 90% of all software, even proprietary code, is actually open source code. So it is everywhere. Even if you think about open source versus proprietary, most of proprietary software is open source. It's also been proven, and research is now available to show that it has a very specific economic impact. And indeed, if we increased our creation of open source contributions in the European region, research has shown that it would actually increase our GDP and our number of startups because it allows for this flow of innovation to happen very quickly. And when we think about research, and we think about the ability to translate research or to transform research into impactful products and services that we can build an economy around, open source is an incredibly useful way to get software from a research stage into a commercial product or service, and indeed is referenced in many open research and open science policies the world over, including in Europe, including in Ireland. And a lot of our research software is now being created as open source software. And we need to do that better. Then, if you think about the social impact, the UN and many of the world's organizations like the WHO and other organizations are all calling for digital public infrastructure or digital public goods to be available as open source software so that it becomes more transparent and trustable, so that it can actually be disseminated throughout the world so that we both have a consistent approach to dealing with the Sustainable Development Goals and a way for other countries and organizations to collaborate around those approaches. So I would say that in the AI context, we're now seeing how open source models and open source is actually shown to actually potentially disrupt and be more innovative more quickly than closed source models. And you have seen that with the rise of DeepSeek. So Dr. McNicholas was talking earlier about the rise of DeepSeek being downloaded, but that's partially because you can download it very quickly and actually modify it and actually run it with your own data sets and examine what it's doing. And it gives everyone the flexibility to do that. It's also being used a lot in terms of looking for the kinds of AI models that are smaller, more energy efficient, and can actually get us to better AI as well. And even Sam Altman from OpenAI, which is not open, but OpenAI has actually, Sam Altman came out and said he was perhaps on the wrong side of history, recognizing the fact that things like DeepSeek, other open source models, flow through the ecosystem more quickly and get adopted more quickly. So as a tool for actually increasing the adoption of any technology, open source software is a great approach to have. And open source collaboration, why is it so popular now? I think it is this idea of frictionless reuse, the fact that people can pull it, do what they want with it, distribute it as they like without restriction. That allows for accelerated innovation, not just by the creators of the software, but anyone who's associated with the creation of the software, or anyone who wants to get the impact from that software. So it's not all relying on one organization or one person. It means that anyone who creates the software, you will not know where the actual application can come from. And that means that there's a shared cost, because people can collaborate. A shared cost on building the innovation for the future, and also a shared risk. Because now it's not all on one organization to be able to deal with the cybersecurity issues that might rise. But you can, there's a financial services open source technology group, and we had a speaker for that recently at one of our events, and he said, it's about mutualizing the cost of compliance. And I thought that's a very financial services thing to say, but that's exactly what we're talking about here. It's about mutualizing the cost of keeping things secure and sharing the risk. And of course, it has economic and social impact, and it increased trust and transparency. So open collaboration is good. It's good for groups. It's good for individuals. So how do we do it at scale? Well, I think in the corporate world, one of the tools that people use is the organizational construct called an OSPO, or an open source program office. And this has emerged as a way, something that is put in place to help this be done better. And it looks at the whole idea of how do we do open source better. And I want to kind of pull this out at a kind of a meta level for you. When we hear of everything we heard today, there is so much opportunity for us all to invest in research pillars, or very specific scenarios where things like AI, where things have to be more secure, and where things like AI can actually create huge value for the world. But I want to talk about, or make you think about, the idea that we also want to actually invest in horizontal supports to make everyone who's involved in this endeavor more successful. And open source program offices as a center of excellence to make everyone more successful, looking at the policies and compliance and how to remove blockers and processes, how to build infrastructure to support people, how to do that in an open, shareable, consistent way. All of that is important. And not just in corporations, where these have been very popular for many years, open source program offices, but also in academia. As a major part of our innovation ecosystem, as a place in Ireland where so much fantastic research, you heard about some of it today, where so much fantastic research is happening, then how do we use academic open source program offices to do things like make us better at actually doing open source? Because as much as I said about the fact that there's loads of open source software out there, I can tell you right now that any university in the world, if you go look at their open source availability, you will find loads of source code available on GitHub or GitLab. Will they have a license? Are they therefore actually open source? No. Vast majority of them will not have a license. They won't actually have any legal situation at all. They are not done correctly. It doesn't have the documentation to make it adoptable. It doesn't have the contribution guide to actually enable that shared cost of mutualized risk or whatever it might be. But there's nothing there that actually takes it the whole way to making it a collaborative tool. So we need to look at how do we actually bring open source excellence into universities? How do we help and grease the wheel of research impact, both from a social and an economic perspective? And we know that actually many of academic OSPOs are working on this and getting better at this, but we need to actually scale that capacity. And then how do we actually bring the skills related to this whole field into our next generation of folks that are actually building the software that is going to be controlling our lives and works in the future, or at least helping in that. And with the academic OSPO space, another area is very much this idea of outreach and infrastructure support. What are the tools that you can build that enable everyone who are working in these areas? And how do we actually use this function as a way to create those collaborative network association and relationships so we can learn what's happening elsewhere and reuse the best in class wherever it may be happening in the world. So, as I mentioned, I'm involved in this community for university and research institution open source program offices. It's a group of over 50 individuals from 26 institutions, 6 of which are from Europe, and 2 of which are actually from Ireland. So Lero and the Trinity College Dublin both have open source program offices in the academic space. But we as a community are sharing, in an open source fashion of course, the idea of the best practices and all the tools and resources that help people get better. And I think as an ecosystem, we really need to think about what are the tools and resources that we can share so everyone is doing things better and more efficiently. So when I think about powering change in our time, I'm thinking open source and OSPOs are just one way to help us empower that change that we know is coming, that we have to get on board with. But we can't just have an ever-long and ever-increasing list of things to do. We need to start thinking about the institutional constructs and the infrastructure, not just technical, but people-led and organizational-led, that will help us get there. So if you're interested in talking anything more about this, please do connect with me. I'd love to talk to you all about it and even maybe learn about more instances of where that's happening in Ireland, because we'd love to showcase it. All right, thank you very much.